Hey, deep divers, welcome back. You ever think about what cannabis is actually doing to your brain while you're using it?
I do, actually, quite a bit.
Well, good, because that's exactly what we're looking at today.
Perfect.
So we're going to be diving into a new study about how cannabis, especially if you use it a lot, might be changing your brain's activity.
Sounds interesting.
Right. So this study was done by some researchers over at the University of Colorado, and it was just published in JAMA Network Open.
Okay.
And it's gotten a lot of attention because it's the largest study of its kind. They looked at brain images from over 1,000 young adults.
Wow, 1,000. That's pretty impressive for a brain imaging study.
Yeah, definitely a lot of data to sift through. So imagine, right, they've got all these young adults, all between 22 and 36 years old, and they have them doing these like brain teasers, puzzles, while they're lying in an MRI machine.
Oh, wow. So they can actually see what's happening in the brain while they're thinking?
Exactly, and that's where it gets really interesting. One of the big things they found was that like a surprisingly large number of the heavy cannabis users showed reduced brain activity in certain areas, particularly when they were doing tasks that involve like working memory.
Okay, so you said heavy cannabis users. What exactly does that mean, like, in terms of this study? How much are we talking about?
So in this study, they defined heavy use as anyone who'd used cannabis over 1,000 times in their lifetime.
1,000 times. Okay, so that's a lot of cannabis.
It is. And I think that's one of the reasons why these findings are so noteworthy. You know, they found that 63% of those heavy users showed this reduced brain activity during the working memory tasks.
Okay, that is a significant percentage.
It is. And it really makes you think, right? Like, what does that actually mean for someone's day-to-day life if their brain is showing reduced activity in those areas?
Right, because working memory is kind of a big deal, isn't it? It's like what we use for everything. Remembering a phone number, following instructions, even just like keeping track of what someone's saying in a conversation.
Oh, yeah. Totally. Like if someone's giving you directions or if you're trying to like do mental math at the grocery store, all that relies on working memory.
Exactly. And I know I've definitely had those moments where I'm like, wait, what was I just doing? Or I can't remember where I put my keys.
Oh, all the time.
Yeah. And so if this study's saying that frequent cannabis use could actually be making those everyday tasks harder, then that's definitely something to pay attention to.
It is. It's not just like, oh, I feel a little foggy after I use cannabis. This is suggesting there could be longer-term impacts on how your brain functions.
Right. Like it's actually affecting the physical structure or activity of your brain.
And specifically, the parts of your brain that control your working memory.
Okay, so can we maybe dive into like which parts of the brain we're talking about? Because I know they have those really complicated scientific names.
Me do.
But like, can you break it down for us? What do these areas actually do, and why should we care if they're not functioning at their best?
Yeah, absolutely. So this study found reduced activity in three main areas: the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, the dorsomedial prefrontal cortex,
Right.
and the anterior insula.
Those are some real tongue twisters.
Yeah,
But what do they actually do? Like in plain English?
Yeah. So the dorsolateral prefrontal cortex, it's kind of like the CEO of your brain, if you will.
The CEO?
Yeah. It's involved in planning, making decisions, controlling your impulses.
Oh, okay.
So if this area isn't as active as it should be, you might have trouble focusing, staying organized, or you might be more easily distracted.
So that's the CEO. Got it. What about the next one?
Okay, so then we have the dorsomedial prefrontal cortex, and this one's more like the social butterfly of the brain. It helps you understand social cues, navigate your relationships, and even empathize with other people.
Interesting.
So basically, this area is really important for your social interactions.
So are you saying that like heavy cannabis use could potentially affect not just how we think, but also how we connect with other people?
Yeah, that's a possibility. Definitely something that researchers are looking into more.
And what was that last one? The anterior?
The anterior insula.
Yeah. What's that one all about?
Okay, so the anterior insula, this one's actually involved in a bunch of different functions.
Oh, okay.
Including processing your emotions, your self-awareness, and even your sense of taste and smell.
Wow. So it's not just about thinking clearly, it could actually change how you experience the world around you.
Right, exactly.
Fascinating.
You know what's interesting is that it wasn't just the heavy, lifelong users who showed these changes. The study also looked at people who had only been using cannabis more recently, maybe not for years and years, and a large percentage of them showed similar reductions in brain activity.
Oh, really? How many are we talking about?
68% of recent users, to be exact.
Wow, so even if you haven't been using for decades, there could still be noticeable effects.
That's what this research seems to suggest.
Hmm. Well, this is definitely giving me a lot to think about.
Me too, me too. But, okay, here's another big question. What if you decide to cut back on your cannabis use or even quit altogether? Does your brain bounce back?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Right.
And that's actually what we're going to be exploring in the next part of our deep dive.
Stay tuned. Okay, so we've seen some pretty significant findings, I guess you could say, about how heavy cannabis use could be affecting our brains,
Right.
especially when we're talking about like working memory. But I'm sure some people are listening and thinking, well, hold on, I don't use cannabis every day. Does this research even apply to me?
That's a really important question. And honestly, it's where things start to get a little more complicated,
Right.
because this particular study, it really focused on young adults and specifically on people who are either heavy users or had used recently. So it doesn't like give us this full picture of how cannabis might be affecting, different age groups or people who only use occasionally or even people who are using cannabis for medical reasons.
So it sounds like we can't just assume that if anyone uses cannabis at all, they're going to experience these same like brain activity changes.
Exactly. Every brain is different, right?
Yeah.
And there's so many factors that can come into play when it comes to how cannabis actually interacts with our bodies and our minds. Like think about your genetics, how often you use it, the potency of the cannabis you're using, even like your mindset going into it. It can all make a difference.
Okay, so there are a lot of nuances here.
Oh, absolutely. And, we're still learning so much about cannabis, especially when we're talking about the long-term effects.
Right.
So this study gives us a lot to consider, but it's really just one piece of the puzzle.
Okay, but let's get back to what you were asking before. You were wondering if there's any chance for the brain to bounce back, like if someone decides to cut back or quit using cannabis. What did the researchers find out about that?
So one of the more encouraging things they found was that when people abstain from cannabis before doing those cognitive tests, their performance actually seemed to improve. So that's kind of a good sign.
It is. It is.
Okay.
So it seems like maybe there's some hope. Like maybe our brains are more resilient than we thought.
Possibly. But I know there's always we have to be careful about, jumping to conclusions based on this one study. Because going cold turkey, like suddenly stopping all cannabis use, especially if you've been a heavy user, that could actually cause its own set of, cognitive problems. It's tricky.
So quitting all at once, maybe not the best idea.
Yeah, probably not ideal for most people.
Yeah.
It really is a complex issue. And I think we need a lot more research to figure out like the safest and most effective way to help people who are trying to, reduce their cannabis use or quit completely.
So it sounds like we're still figuring a lot of this out.
Yeah, definitely.
But I guess based on what we do know from this study, what are some of the main things you hope our listeners take away from this? What should they be keeping in mind as they, think about their own relationship with cannabis?
Well, I think, the biggest takeaway for me is that this study gives us a lot of valuable insights into how heavy cannabis use could be affecting brain activity, especially those parts of the brain that are involved in working memory. And while this study doesn't necessarily mean that everyone who uses cannabis will experience these same changes, it really highlights the importance of being aware of the potential risks.
Okay, so even if you're not, what this study defines as a heavy user, it's still a good idea to pay attention to how cannabis makes you feel,
Oh, absolutely.
both, physically and mentally.
Yes, definitely.
And if you're noticing, maybe some changes in your thinking, your behavior, maybe you're having more trouble with memory or concentration, it might be worth, talking to your doctor or maybe thinking about cutting back on how much cannabis you're using.
I totally agree. The more we understand about how cannabis affects our brains,
Yeah.
the better choices we can make. you
Yeah.
know? It's all about making informed decisions about our health and well-being.
Well said. Well said. So with that in mind, maybe we can shift gears a bit and think about some of the broader implications of this research. Because this isn't just about, individual choices.
Right.
This research could actually have a pretty big impact on how we think about cannabis as a society.
Definitely.
We've spent this deep dive really digging into this research about cannabis and brain activity,
Yeah.
specifically how it affects working memory.
Mhm.
Right.
But it seems like, this goes beyond just personal choices about using cannabis.
I think so too.
Like this research has some implications for for society as a whole, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Mm.
As cannabis is becoming more accepted, more accessible,
Right.
this study really raises some important questions for public health messaging.
Yeah.
We can't just rely on those just say no campaigns anymore.
No.
I don't think so. I need a more nuanced approach.
Right. Yeah. Something that acknowledges that there can be benefits.
Right.
But also being honest about,
Yeah.
the potential risks.
Exactly. Yeah. Especially for younger people.
Yeah. It seems like we almost need a cannabis literacy campaign.
Oh, I like that.
Kind of like what we did with sex education.
Yeah.
Like acknowledging that people are going to make their own choices.
Right.
But giving them the information to do it safely and responsibly.
Yeah, I love that analogy. Cannabis literacy is essential, especially in a world where it's becoming more and more normalized.
People need to understand that cannabis affects everyone differently.
Right.
There's so many different factors.
Oh, yeah.
Like we were talking about before, genetics, frequency of use, potency, mindset. It can all play a role.
Right. And, it's not even just about personal health, right?
Yeah.
Like, this research also has implications when you think about things like workplace safety.
Well, absolutely.
Especially in jobs that require people to have, a high level of cognitive function.
For sure. Imagine, someone operating heavy machinery
Yeah.
or working in healthcare.
Right.
Even small changes in working memory
Right.
could lead to really serious consequences.
Yeah, it's kind of unnerving to think about.
It is. It is.
It's like we rely on those people to be, at their best.
Exactly. Exactly.
So it's
This study really highlights the need for employers to maybe rethink their policies, regarding cannabis use, especially for jobs where safety is critical.
But that's a tough balance, right?
It is.
Because you want to respect individual freedom,
Yeah.
but also make sure the public is safe.
Absolutely. It is a very delicate balance,
Yeah.
but it's a conversation we need to have.
Mm-hmm.
And it needs to be based on, science,
Right.
not on fear or stigma.
Well said. Well said.
Or,
So as we kind of wrap up this deep dive, is there a key message that you want to leave our listeners with?
I think the biggest takeaway is that cannabis is complex.
Yeah.
And it has a variety of effects on the brain, some of which we're just starting to understand.
Yeah.
This study suggests that heavy use could be impacting working memory and other functions, but it's definitely not the whole story. We still need more research to really see those long-term effects, especially how it affects different age groups and different patterns of use.
Right, right. And I guess in the meantime, we all just have a responsibility to stay informed. Absolutely.
To, be aware of our own cannabis use.
Yeah.
And to just be open to having these conversations about cannabis.
Yes, I agree.
So, on that note, here's something for everyone to think about. Knowing what we've talked about today, how might you approach those everyday tasks, that really require you to focus and concentrate? It's just something to consider as you continue to, think about your own relationship with cannabis. That's a good question.
Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dive.
Thanks for having me.
We'll be back next week with another fascinating topic.
Can't wait.
Until then, stay curious.